All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about 1930 in film. So this is part of a movie challenge that I've been taking on. This is the third time I've done this. It is to choose a year at random and then reach 100 watched films from that year. Previously, I've done 1968 and 1994, and I just tackled 1930. And so my goal is to reach 100 watched films. So if I've already seen 50 from that year, I'll just watch 50 more. I'm not going to watch a whole full 100. When starting with 1930, I had seen Animal Crackers by the Marx Brothers, and that was it. So I have been on this one for, I think it's been about 3 years, maybe 3.5, that I've been working on making my way up to 100 movies from 1930. So a couple of things to know about Hollywood at the time. It's right on the verge of a couple of big things. One is we're starting to really make the transition from silent films to sound films. Of the 100 that I watched, 79 of them were sound. Two were partly sound. Like there was one that had sound songs, but then the actual dialogue was all silent. And then 19 of them were just fully silent. And so we start to see that transition happening. A little bit less, this transition had not made its way in yet, but we're starting to see some people experimenting with color. And again, we're seeing I saw 3 films that were partly in color, 5 that were fully in color, and then 92% were in black and white. So that tech was there, that tech was being explored and played with, but was definitely not the as popular as it was. So there was still a while left before we saw the black and white really fade out. And I didn't track this because it was hard to do so, but 1930 was the year that the Hays Code was written. And for anybody who doesn't know, the Hays Code was a very strict set of what films could and could not be shown, could not include and be shown in major theaters. And so it was lists of, they were restricted on the kind of language they could use, on what they could show in terms of sexual stuff, in terms of some violence. And so the Hays Code was written in, I believe, February of 1930, but wasn't really being enforced. It wasn't really enforced until a couple of years later. So while technically most of these movies were made during the years of the Hays Code, most of them, nobody was enforcing it. And so we still saw a lot that were a lot racier than what most people think of when they think of classic film. And interestingly enough, of the 3 years that I randomly chose for this project, one was 1968, which was the year that the Hays Code ended. So I just completely coincidentally chose the first year it existed and the last year it existed. So let's look at some demographics. Out of 100 films, I mostly watched English language films because that's what I was able to find. The ones that I found that were not English language were also less likely to have subtitles. So I watched 88 that were in English. I watched 4 that were French, and 3 that were German, 3 that were Russian, and then 2 that were Japanese. So that was cool. Quite a few of the non-English ones I watched were silent films. And the most popular genres, unsurprisingly, drama and comedy are at the top, but it was heavily a dramatic year. 73 of the films I watched could have fallen into the category of drama. 33 of them could have fallen under comedy. 30% of them had some form of musical aspect to them. A lot of war films. I don't know if we were hitting the right point right after. We obviously hadn't gone into World War II, so we were a couple of years after World War, a couple of like a decade and a half after World War One. So maybe people were starting to really talk about that. And then 8 of them were documentaries. So a couple of patterns that I noticed as I was watching. The 1930 had a lot of films revolving around the theme of class, a lot of upper class, lower class. Over half of the movies that I watched, 56% of them had themes of class represented strongly, which was a real surprise to me. So some examples, the movie Earth looked a lot at the worker class versus ruling class. We saw a lot of films about worker class folks being taken advantage of. Almost all the romances featured somebody from an upper class marrying someone from a lower class. Sometimes this was a good thing, sometimes it was a bad thing. It really depended on the perspective of the storyteller. And then a surprising amount of the French films, specifically Apropos Denise and L'Âge d'Or, looked very critically at extravagant wealth. Another theme that we saw was women behaving badly. It was clearly a time when they were looking at what women should and should not be allowed to do in society. 34% of the films that I saw had that as a primary theme. So sometimes the women were behaved badly and were rewarded in some way, such as the divorcee, where she's clearly a protagonist, Madam Satan, where she gets the guy at the end with it, let us be gay and leaves ankles. They all get the reward at the end. And of course, even if they're behaving badly, their reward at the end is a happy marriage. And then sometimes these women behave badly in almost identical ways and are punished. We have the Devil's Holiday, the Blue Angel, Anna Christie, Hell's Angels, all of which come down very harshly on the women behaving outside of the societal norms. 1930 had some racism in its films. I was actually very pleased that when I actually tallied up the numbers, 75% of them weren't overtly terribly racist, which is great. I kind of expected it to be more, and there might have been, I'm sure there were things I missed, but 9% of them I wrote kind of racist. Maybe they had a stereotypical character or a couple of references to something. And then there were 16 films that I would qualify as very racist. Of the 8 documentaries, we had 2 separate documentaries about exotic Africa, both of which were entirely fake and discredited later. So that's super great. We got the same actor in Yellowface twice in 2 different movies. And then we got Eddie Cantor twice once in blackface and one in redface in the same movie. So just the variety of racism was plentiful. 1930 mostly has short films. Of the 100 films, only 33 of them were over an hour and a half. So I should have gotten my way through them faster than 3 years, probably. Just a couple of interesting firsts or earlies. This was Greta Garbo and Lillian Gish making their speaking debuts. They've been very famous silent actresses. This was our first feature film lead for John Wayne and Ginger Rogers, happened in this year. This has one of the films that's often cited as the first film in the prison film genre. It was nominated for an Oscar. It was Marlene Dietrich's US debut. She'd been working in Germany before that, and she actually had 2 films that I watched from 1930. And then we had early film entries from Alfred Hitchcock, John Ford, Frank Capra, and Yasujiro Ozu. I watched 2 Japanese silent films from him, which was a lot of fun. So it was very cool to see these folks who would then become these titans of classic film and see some of their very earliest ones. And a couple of unexpected double features. I found some patterns as I went through and wanted to kind of share some of those. So Love Through and Follow Through and Love in the Rough, both watched very closely together, were both golf-based romantic comedies. This happened, I saw these right after seeing another drama that also featured golf. And so for a while I started tracking and being like, is this one of those unexpected themes? But it was just those 3 movies. But I wouldn't have expected 2 golf-based romantic comedies in the same year. City Girl and The Devil's Holiday are basically the same story about a city girl falling in love and marrying a farm boy. And in one version, the girl is evil, and in City Girl, she is innocent. So in one of them, she's after his money, and the other one, she's absolutely genuinely in love with him. In A Notorious Affair and Sin Takes a Holiday, again, watched back to back, both had Basil Rathbone as the other love interest who could not get the girl and then had to sadly say goodbye to her at the end of the movie. The Divorcee and Let Us Be Gay, one I watched right at the beginning of this challenge and one right at the very end, but both of them are basically the same plot. Norma Shearer is cheated on by her husband and she leaves him and she lives it up and discovers herself and makes a great new life. And then at the end, they get back together. We had 2 World War I films from the German point of view, which was interesting. One was a German-made film, and one was the All Quiet on the Western Front that was made in the U.S. So both of those were really interesting back and forth between those 2. And then we had a couple of unusual title similarities. We had The Big House, The Big Trail, and The Big Pond, which were very hard to keep straight in my head for a while. And then we had a bunch of holidays. We had The Devil's Holiday, Sin Takes a Holiday, and then, of course, just the movie Holiday. The bottom 5 of the whole year were 4 that were overtly horribly racist. Africa Speaks in Ingagi were the 2 fake African documentaries, and they were terrible. The Green Goddess was a story about a fake Southeast Asian nation that was kidnapping white women. And Whoopi was the one that had Eddie Cantor doing 2 different types of dressing up as other races. And then Lilium was based on the same short story that the musical Carousel was. So it is pro-domestic violence in how it tells its story. So in other years, the bottom 5 might not have been so morally egregious, but these are all 5 that the the morals and the social norms of 1930 absolutely do not hold up today. My top five. All Quiet on the Western Front. If you haven't seen it, or if you've only seen the 2022 German version that just got a bunch of nominations, definitely worth watching. That Night's Wife is one of the Japanese ones. It is a really, really sweet, interesting little story about a man who robs a bank to try to pay for his daughter's health care. Outward Bound is a story about a whole bunch of people who are on a mysterious ship and they realize partway through that they are on their way to the underworld. Madam Satan is a bizarre Cecil B. DeMille film that is about a woman trying to woo her husband back by dressing in disguise, and and at the end it becomes a disaster film. And City Girl is a really sweet, silent romance about this family this new couple just trying to make it together. So next up, I drew randomly, and I get 1996. I have seen 64 movies from that already, so I have 30 something left to go. And there's about 25 on that list that I've already seen that I want to rewatch. So come back in hopefully not 3 years from now, hopefully a little bit sooner, and I will have more to tell you about what I learned about 1996, and maybe especially how it was different from 1994, which I watched not that long ago. And that is my presentation. Thank you.